Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for being here. I really believe like you were supposed to be here. In fact, I dare say that I think you were called to be here. And why do I think that? I think that because I just talked to our speaker for today, and she is an amazing chaplain here at Cook Children's. She is about to do some preaching, okay? You are going to be blessed and encouraged by the inspiring Tracy Dunn.
Thanks, guys. It is so good to be with you. So I wanted to tell you a story. I was in my 20s, just a couple of years ago, and I went to my pastor and I said, I believe I am called to be a minister. And he looked, and then he sighed, and he said, well, you're either called or you're crazy. And I promise you, ever since that day, I still have many days when I think, which one is it? What is this word calling? What does it mean to be called? I think it's a word we hide behind stained glass windows, and I think that's sad because in my deepest heart, I believe we are all called to do the things we do. Frederick Buechner says, we will find our calling when our deepest gladness and the world's deepest need meet. And that can happen in any number of settings. I get to see it every day when I'm here at Cook Children's because the people I work with are called. Let me give you an example of a recent week of mine. I got to my floor to see my patients for the day. I had in hand my census, which has their names, their ages, a brief diagnosis, that sort of thing. So I was ready, going to see my patients for the day. I got to the first door, and there I saw on my list was going to be a 5-year-old little boy who had a recent new diagnosis. So I kind of got myself ready because I know what that feels like. That usually means that there's lots of questions in the room, a lot of confusion, a lot of worry. So I knocked on the door and kind of got ready for that experience. And I went into the room, and instead of all of those things, I was blown back by the sight of a bunch of red foam noses. The little boy had a red foam nose. Mom and Dad had a red foam nose. Even grumpy grandpa in the corner was wearing a red foam nose. And I realized that meant that my friends, the clowns, had already been there. And where I was expecting to see worry and confusion, for the moment I saw happiness and gladness and just comfort. So I said a blessing upon them. I let them know I was available if they needed me for another conversation, and I left the room. And as I was shutting the door, I thought about my friends, the clowns. You see, we meet together regularly, the clowns and I, so that we can talk about the things that they see every day. Unfortunately, face paint and baggy clothes are no armor against the realities that we see in these hallways every day. Clowns cry too, but they are called to do the work they do, and they can't imagine doing anything else. I stepped down the hallway to the next room, and going into that room was my friend Micah. She was putting on her isolation gown and her gloves, and her shoulders looked a little heavy, so I gave her a big hug. I knew that this was the third day that Micah was the nurse for this particular patient and her family. And while the 2-year-old in that room was getting better and was going to go home soon, nobody wants to be cooped up in a hospital room for 3 straight days, especially an active toddler and her mom. And fussy toddlers often result in frustrated mothers who say things to nurses that they don't mean to say. Now, there's lots of places in this world that Micah could be a nurse, where fussy toddlers and frustrated mothers are not part of the equation. But Micah is called to do the work she does, and she can't imagine doing anything else. I bypassed the next room because the doctor was going in. He needed his time with that family. The charge nurse had told me earlier in the day that the test results were back for that patient, and the news wasn't good. There's lots of ways to be a doctor. Lots of times when you can practice medicine and you are not expected on a regular basis to hand to families their worst nightmares. The only way that physician, any of our physicians at Cook Children's, are able to do the work they do is because they are called to be here. They can't imagine doing anything else. So I walked on to the fourth room, looked at my list, and sighed. Because on the other side of the door, my list told me that the language in that room is not my own. Now, I'd like to tell you that my week of Spanish immersion school in Minnesota made me fluent, but chaplains aren't supposed to lie. I know just enough to know that I don't know very much at all. I can introduce myself, tell folks what I do, tell them I'm praying for them, but beyond that, I need help. So I got ready, because one more time, I was going to get a good, healthy dose of language embarrassment. I walked through the door, and there was this really active and happy conversation going on. And I sighed with relief because my friend Miss Soledad was in the room. And she was busy emptying the trash and cleaning the floor and giving to this mother, this stressed out, tired mother, the thing she needed most of all, the familiar cadence of her own language and an understanding ear, something that I couldn't give her. I fumbled through my introduction. They smiled, were very graceful, and then they let me leave. I knew later I'd get a hug for my effort from Miss Soledad and a referral, if necessary, from perhaps the one person who knew what that mom needed more than anyone else on the floor. Do you understand what I'm saying? There's lots of jobs Miss Soledad could do in this world. Lots of places where trash overflows and floors get dirty. But she chooses to be in this place, interacting every day with people who are hurting and who need someone who can provide to them comfort and safety. Miss Soledad is called to be here, and she can't imagine being anywhere else. I got to the last room on my list. You don't want to know what's in the last room. Because in the last room is a 12-year-old girl who just couldn't take the bullying anymore. And so the night before, she had gone into her parents' bathroom, opened their medicine cabinet, and taken a handful of whatever she could find. I don't like going in these rooms, and I go in them way too often. And I know what to expect. Typically, the patient is sleeping off whatever she or he has taken. And the parents are in the room wondering if they'll ever sleep again. They are scared. They are feeling guilty. It's not a nice place to visit. but a place I am called to go. So I got ready, opened the door, and I was knocked back by the laughter in the room. You see, Mom and Dad had stepped out for a minute, and instead, my friend John was there. John was the sitter assigned to this precious girl for the day, and John had absconded with her teddy bear. And that teddy bear had developed the worst case of audible flatulence that you have ever heard. And the giggles kept coming and coming from the bed. And I smiled because for just a minute, whatever it was that had brought her to our door had melted away. For just a minute, she was just a 12-year-old girl again. A 12-year-old girl who loves stuffed animals and silly noises. I know for a fact that later that day, my friend John went home. He hugged his own kids tighter. He told his wife about the day he had had, and together they cried for all the broken children in this world. But see, John's superpower is that he knows how to make children feel safe. He can do all that other medical-y stuff too. But John knows how to make a child feel safe and loved. And so the next morning he got up and he came to work again. Because John is called to do what he does. He can't imagine doing anything else. I could go on. I could tell you about what the parents tell me, about the cafeteria workers who learn their names and recognize their faces and genuinely ask, how's today going? And then they wait for the answer. I can tell you what the NICU mom tells me about the parking lot attendant who every evening as she's leaving says, I hope today was a good day. I'll be here tomorrow. We'll do it again. You see, people ask, how are you a chaplain in a children's hospital? And I tell them, you don't understand. Every day of my life, I work with rock stars and superheroes, people who are called to do the work they do. They can't imagine doing anything else. What is it that Buechner says? Where our greatest gladness and the world's greatest need meet, that's where we'll find our calling. Have you seen the new movie, the documentary for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood? Oh, you've got to go see it. It's amazing. My kids and I, they're here today. We went the other night and saw it. Oh, who are we kidding? I went to see it. They came along for the free popcorn. And because they love their mama. If ever there was a person who embodied his calling, it was Fred Rogers. And what did he do? He took the thing he loved most. And he saw a need in our world, and he found a way to put them together. And we were never the same. Mother Teresa says, we don't all have to do great things, but we can all do small things with great love. Sisters and brothers, I don't know what your calling is. But in my deepest being, I know you are called. What is that thing that you love doing more than anything else? Where in your world are you seeing a need? How can those go together? I believe you'll find it if you look. And so I leave you today with the words of William Sloane Coffin's benediction. May God give you grace never to sell yourselves short. Grace to risk something big for something good. Grace to remember that the world is now too dangerous for anything but truth and too small for anything but love. So may God take your minds and think through them. May God take your lips and speak through them. May God take your hearts and set them on fire. So be it.
Tracy, oh my goodness. Thank you for those words.
Absolutely.
Those were so encouraging, and it just makes me want to run out of here and do something special.
Well, you already do. I told you earlier, Winnie, you are called to do what you do.
I guess I am. Thank you for that. Let's talk a little bit about you.
Me.
Tell me when you first knew that you were called to do something that most women don't get a chance to do, or shouldn't do, or not supposed to do, or not allowed to do. How did that come to you that you were called to be in ministry?
You know, that's exactly the truth. I had no models for women in ministry. And so I actually went off to school to be a music teacher because the women that I knew that had been ministers to me were music teachers. And I got to Baylor and I went to a church that was on the edge of campus because I didn't have a car. Kids didn't have cars back then, my children. I went to this church and it looked nice and I needed to go to church because, you know, I'm a good girl. And so I went to church and then a few weeks later we had communion, Lord's Supper, and they had women deacons.
Ooh.
I know. I was so shocked. I went to the pastor the next week, sat him down, and said, now, I don't think you know, but you're not supposed to do that. And he said, well, actually, we believe they're called. And it was like bells and whistles went off in my head. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's what I've been feeling all this time. I could be a minister. And it took several years more for me to wrestle with the idea, play around with ministry, be a little youth minister in a little church. And I did end up teaching school for about a year and a half. That was enough.
You weren't called to do
No,
that.
ma'am. No, ma'am. And off to seminary I went.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That is wonderful. How do you know, Tracy, that you're called to do something as opposed to just wanting to do something? There was a show not too long, that used to come on, and you would see people come and they would sing, and you would be like, "Oh my gosh, these people really think they can sing, and they can't. They want to sing, but they're not called to sing." So how do you distinguish between your calling and your wanting?
It's hard, absolutely. I want to be, rich and famous. I haven't succeeded at that yet, even though I'm just still in my 20s. So I think it really is a matter of finding not only the thing you love, but where is that need? And I'm sorry we didn't have a need for those bad singers. I think, I even think of my brother, the banker, who's making some moolah. But he is called to help people who want to amass enough wealth that they can then turn around and support places like, children's hospitals and churches and foundations. And we need those people. We desperately need those people. So I think there is a way to find the thing you're really good at. And then look for the need. There are needs. There are ways we can all use our gifts. Absolutely.
As you are a chaplain here at Cook Children's, you walk the halls, you mentioned how you go from room to room. What is it that people would be surprised to know that goes on here and would be really interested to know what happens here?
Oh, yeah. That's a good question. Because so often when I introduce myself, I say, well, I'm a chaplain at Cook Children's. Oh, that must be hard. Well, absolutely, we have hard days. But we have so many amazing days. We have children, most of them go home well. And they go home healthy. And every day, I get to stand beside parents who are going through that thing they never wanted to ever have to go through. And 99% of them are rising up to that and taking care of their children and advocating for them and just putting aside all of their worries and concerns for their children. Who doesn't want to get to see something like that every day of their lives? And again, the people we work with, you know, it really is the rare person in this building that doesn't feel called to be here. It just goes on and on and on.
Yeah. And even though the days can be sometimes difficult, I think that's when you know that you are called, because you overcome that and you want to come back. Even if the days are difficult and hard and you see heartache and pain, you want to come back so you can relieve and keep that suffering down as much as you can.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tracy, thank you so much for your encouragement, for your words of wisdom. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
It's been a joy.
Thank you.